I've got 10 o'clock, so we're going to get the webinar going. This is Victoria Beal with the Ohio LTAP Center, and I want to welcome you to our webinar this morning on the basics of conducting a roadway safety audit. I will actually be your presenter this morning instead of just being the voice in the background that hosts the webinar, and I'm happy to be able to spend some time this Valentine's Day sharing with you my love of doing roadway safety audits, because I feel that it is definitely a tool that can be used to improve safety on your roadways. So with that, I'm going to go over a couple of housekeeping items, and then we're going to go ahead and move right into the presentation. On your screen, you should hopefully see a chat pod to the left hand side on the bottom of your screen. If you don't, hopefully you'll have a circle with a thought bubble in it, and that thought bubble, you can just click on that and it'll display the chat pod on the bottom left hand side of your screen. The other thing you should see is that above the chat pod, you will hopefully see a list of other folks who are in the webinar as well. So anyway, hopefully at least you see the chat pod on the left-hand side, and that's where I'll ask that you put your questions in while I'm presenting. I will open the phone lines at the end of the presentation in order for you to ask audio questions, but during the presentation I'm going to leave everyone muted in the hopes that that will cut down on any background noise. The other thing is that if you do have any issues with the webinar, seeing anything during the presentation, feel free to type in the chat pod. I'll be monitoring that as well as doing your presentation this morning, so hopefully I'll be able to catch it if there are any issues or concerns. One last thing that I'll note, and this is not to scare you off from asking questions by any means, but I am attempting to record this webinar, and I'm doing it because during the webinar we're going to discuss a new toolbox that Ohio LTAP has developed on how to conduct roadway safety audits. And that toolbox, I plan on posting a copy of this recording, so that way others can also go through it in the future and just get a quick overview of the basics of conducting a roadway safety audit. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move into the actual presentation. Hopefully all of you have heard of roadway safety audits before, but if you haven't, what it is it's a process where you have a multidisciplinary team working with an actual roadway owner to review the roadway, meaning a section or an intersection or a segment, and to propose a recommended change to improve safety. When I say that you're going to review the roadway, a lot of times people will want to include the actual roadway owner, and the process as defined nationally doesn't normally include the roadway owner with the actual team. So one of the things that I do a little differently with my roadway safety audits, and I have found that it works very well, is that I actually include the roadway owner in the team and throughout the entire process. As we go through the national steps for a roadway safety audit, you will see a difference in that, but I will discuss the differences and make sure I point out to you where the national process varies a little bit from the process that we've been using here in Ohio. Just one quick second. Looks like there's a couple of issues there. It did say, I guess someone's saying that they have a blank screen, and hopefully the screen is no longer blank. And then the presentation itself, yes, it will be shared after the webinar. I will also be sharing a lot of other resources with you after the webinar. I'm hoping that the person who was having a blank screen can see the screen now. And I'm going to discuss why you would want to conduct a roadway safety audit. The road safety audit, oh, you're still not able to see it. I'm sorry, Shane. I'm not quite sure what's going on. Hopefully others can see the screen fine. I know I checked with somebody here in our office earlier who was watching it while I'm presenting, and they said that they were able to see the screen, and I actually saw it on their PC. So I'm going to keep going, and Shane, unfortunately, if the screen doesn't come up for you, I will just make sure that we get that link out for the recording. The roadway safety audit the reason we want to conduct it is that it is a proactive way to examine your roadway and come up with ideas for improvements. And we do it through a multidisciplinary team, which I'm going to discuss what that is in depth a little bit later. But that multidisciplinary team can really add a lot of perspectives to what it is that's occurring with the roadway and ideas more specifically on how to fix the issues that you're encountering out there or that people are encountering that are causing the crashes on the roadway. Nationally, they say that you can get a safety benefit of 10 to 60% reduction in total crashes. I can tell you from roadway safety audits we've done here in Ohio that we have definitely seen, those percentages or more in crash reductions. Some of our first roadway safety audits we did were in Warren County. We looked at 5 different routes there. And this is real data. When you look at the chart that's on the screen now, we have the severity of the crashes in the first 2 columns on the chart, and their post installation of the recommended countermeasures. We measured it for a time period after, and overall, the injury crashes were down 63.8%, but most importantly, I felt was the fact that the fatal crashes were down 100%. And that just speaks volumes to the benefit that you can get from having a roadway safety audit team put together and going out and doing what we call an RSA. I'm going to move into the acronym now, so you become familiar with that as well. But, through the RSA process there in Warren County, when we looked at the contributing factors to the crashes, fixed objects were down 62.9%. The wet condition crashes were down 78.6%. Curve crashes on the curve 67.3%, and excessive speed was down 81%. Now, I also want to point out as we're moving through this that not all of the fixes you're going to find for when you're out there doing an RSA are an engineering fix. And I think that's important to note because you have a team that goes out, and it's a multidisciplinary team, which can consist of law enforcement, first responders, people who just travel the road on a daily basis, your health department, we normally like to involve them as well, along with your engineering disciplines. And that really helps to enhance looking at the issues overall and the fixes. When you look at that excessive speed, there was additional enforcement that went into that discussion. And I'll actually share the team from these roadway safety audits, the makeup of it here in a few slides so you can see. But the officers that were represented took that information back to their units and their agencies, and the enforcement was definitely a countermeasure that was stepped up to help reduce the crashes that were being caused by the excessive speed. So nationally, we have an 8-step process for roadway safety audits. When you look at the process, as I said, this is a process that's looked at as engaging the roadway owner, but then having the team be a separate group and not necessarily including the roadway owner through the blue stages in the process, those stages 3 through 6. Here in Ohio, we've done something a little different. We've actually included the roadway owner all the way through. But you start by identifying a project, and then you select your RSA team. And don't worry about trying to write all this down because we're going to go into a whole lot more detail here in the next few screens for every single step of this process. You conduct a startup meeting. You go out and actually perform a field review. You come back and you conduct an analysis and you prepare a report. With the national process, you present findings to the project owner, meaning the roadway owner at that time, and then the roadway owner actually would prepare a formal response. Here in Ohio, those 2 steps are kind of combined, and it helps to lead into the 8th step, which we will discuss as well, which is incorporating the findings, which means finding money, or resources in order to implement the recommended countermeasures from the road safety audit report. So, step 1, identifying your project. I've had a lot of people ask, what makes a good RSA project? Well, projects, in order to, really justify funding with the way that the HSIP funds law is written, need to have data behind them. So, one key is looking at areas with severe crashes. Now, that doesn't normally, drive it unless you're looking from the engineering perspective where we have all that data that we can pull in and look at. What happens normally is you get an area of concern from residents or maybe the traveling public or law enforcement who are responding to an area an awful lot and want to point out that something is going on that needs to have a looked at and a potential fix. And I think it's really, when you look to see what makes a good RSA project, is you need a marriage between the two. The area of the severe crashes and then also the area of concern. And once you put that together, then you get what really makes a good RSA project. So on the right-hand side of the screen, what you're going to see are types of resources that are available to help identify RSA projects. And what I'm talking about here is the map room, which is an area on the ODOT website where our safety team has actually worked to generate maps for crash trends, history, and they do this by jurisdiction, roadway type, county. I mean, you name it, it's out there, even down to the township level. We have township roadway crash maps available. And here what I did is highlighted a map and a segment of a map to show you that when you pull up these maps, and they're already generated for you, they're PDFs that you can just pull up in the map room through a link, and I will send you a link to the map room after this webinar. You can see that there's intersection crashes and segment crashes highlighted, and they show you by color code, blue, green, yellow, red, the level of severity as far as number of crashes. So I can tell you on the left-hand side of the screen, between a couple of the blue X's, there was a red segment, a red line, and that was actually an RSA that we did out in Muskingum County, which I'll show you some more data about that here in a few minutes. But these maps are updated once a year, and they use the crash data that is finalized normally sometime in the springtime, and then normally by the middle of summer the crash maps are all updated on the website. So I think it's important to know that this tool's there, because while we do have the ability for you to go out and create your own maps, and I'm going to talk about that as well, sometimes you just want to get a quick glimpse of what's going on to see if it's even already on the radar screen as far as having problems. And you can do that through these PDF maps that are out there for you. Now, if you're a do-it-yourselfer, and I tend to be that at times, you can also go generate your own maps, and those are available through our TIMS system. I will send you information out regarding TIMS, and most specifically the GCAT portion of TIMS, which is the GIS crash mapping section. Now, GCAT, a lot of you may remember, used to be a separate program, but it's been moved into TIMS, and we do have webinars that are coming up and also recorded webinars available if you want to learn more information about GCAT and how to use it. It's a fabulous tool, and I definitely encourage you to take the time to learn how to use it if you're going to be doing road safety audits. We have a lot of law enforcement that come to our GCAT training too, because they want to understand how to use the system. And as I talk through it, you'll see why it's important that law enforcement understand how GCAT works and the importance of it. But the data to back up your RSA plans. This is that area in Muskingum County that I pointed out on the other map. I actually went into GCAT and drew a map. It's not a difficult process because the maps actually already are in there. All I had to do was take my cursor and click on a few spots to highlight the area that I wanted to have the system pull the crash information in for, push the button, and it popped all the dots onto the screen for me. It was very easy to use. So here we have that section, and they call this the over the hill area. And one thing that was important to note when we were out doing this RSA is that you'll see the levels of severity on the left, the fatal injury, serious injury, visible injury, possible, and the color codes. There were quite a few crashes through this area, and specifically that curve that you see kind of dipping down to the right there in the middle, that were occurring that actually never even got reported. And we found that out when we were out on the RSA, but it still came up on the overall map because of the number of crashes that were happening out there on the system. And with GCAT, once you've got your map drawn or push the button to get the data on your screen, you can then go through and download what's called the CAM tool file. And this is a file that you can open in Excel, and it will actually list out for you, for the area that you highlighted in TIMS in the GCAT section, all the crashes that occurred. There's a number of tabs at the bottom of the file, and the training that I talked about is for GCAT, both the webinar recorded and live, and also we have in-person training as well if you're interested. That training will go in to how to use this spreadsheet. There's a ton of features in the spreadsheet though that are automated. I like to pull information into the CAM tool file. Like you see here on the screen, the bottom part is really what you'll see come up as far as the actual crashes. And then from there, you push a few buttons and it'll generate different charts and graphs for you. And the charts and graphs are a great piece that you can pull into your packet for your road safety audit team to give them data and information about the crashes that are occurring in the area where you're going to go out and work to see what's occurring. So those charts and graphs will auto-generate for you in this CAM tool file. In the CAM tool file, another piece that is listed that you can get to are the actual crash reports. And you'll see on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen that there's a blue link that says crash report on each line. And you should be able to click on that link. If that link doesn't work for you because of whatever issues, the GCAT instructor presenter also has a way you can pull the crash reports from Public Safety's website. But those crash reports are what all of this data is based off of. And that's why it's so important for the law enforcement officers who are your partners in this to understand that it's their data that's filling in and driving the GCAT system, because this is what we're basing our road safety audit reports. The reason we go out and do road safety audits and then have them up with these recommendation reports, it's all really driving off of the data that they're collecting on the crash reports. The crash reports that you're able to pull up are already redacted. You don't have to worry about any personal sensitive information in there. Also, the crash reports are where you can get the names of the officers who have responded the most often to the crashes that are occurring in the area where you're going to go do your RSA. And that's important because that's how I found the members to invite from law enforcement for our teams. Is I've pulled crash reports for areas, and then I'll go through the actual crash reports and see who the officer was that filled out the report. And if their name comes up over and over and over again, then that's the person I want to invite to be part of the RSA team because they've responded to multiple crashes in that area. And the same with, if there are injuries, the crash report normally will list, who they were transported by, which emergency service transported them. And, that's where you can figure out which, fire department or volunteer fire department ended up doing the transporting to get your first responders invited for your team as well. So this is all important because it will feed into the next step. But I've got a tip for you here. And this will be in the presentation that I'll send you, and it's also included out there on our RSA toolbox, is that GCAT training, we do have it available through LTAP, but it is important because data is what's going to help you get to the funding. And you need to have that data. So we have regular sessions scheduled and available for GCAT training already this year. We have a live webinar coming up next month. with GCAT, and then we have 5 webinars we've recorded over the last year on GCAT. So if you don't want to wait for the March 28th webinar next month, you can watch one of those recordings from this last year, and I've got links on here that'll help you get to those locations. So next step in the RSA process is to build your multidisciplinary team. And this team, as I mentioned before, needs to consist of people who are using the roadway on a daily basis, law enforcement officers, first responders. We've had business owners on our RSA teams, your engineering disciplines, maintenance personnel. They can be some real keys to understanding what's happening with that roadway. Say if you identify that there's an issue with a lot of crashes when it's raining, they can point out issues that are occurring that need to be corrected with the roadway potentially, but you wouldn't see it any other time, but they know it because they're dealing with the roads every day. And your health department, they can be excellent partners in helping you to do outreach and education efforts. So it's important to build that multidisciplinary team. And since we have chosen to include the roadway owner as our partner through this whole process, I always look to the roadway owner to help us build this team because they know who their officers are in their county or their township, their city or village, and they know who it is that they're working with on a daily basis out there. They've as a county engineer, being an elected official, they know who the business owners are who have, said to them, hey, there's an issue with this road out here in front of my business. And, what can we do so it's safer for the people who are coming in to, use my services. So, your roadway owner should be your partner through this whole process. I mentioned our road safety audit team down in Warren County. There we had members of the Warren County Engineers Office as members of our team. We also had representation from the Warren County Sheriff's Office. Officer Riley was one of the folks who had responded to quite a few of the crashes. We had members from Hamilton Township. We were looking at 5 different roadways, and some of those township folks were the ones who were the first responders who were assisting us. We had citizens who came along, and actually one of those citizens ended up being a business owner as well. So that was good to have those perspectives. Those of us from the LTAP side were there to assist with the process and also to drive the big 15-person passenger van because these weren't just intersections. They were, corridors we were looking at. So we drove them. And then we had our District 8 safety partners there as well. So we had our RSA team, and then we had our packet we built for the team on the roadways and the data. We got our team meetings set up, and we went ahead and met with them to explain why it was that a section of roadway was going to be reviewed through the road safety audit process. And I'm going to incorporate some information from other RSAs we've done as well across the state. But, in the packet, we included information about the crashes that were occurring. And on the right-hand side is a little older view of a GCAT mapping. But, this was of a road safety audit we did up in Shelby County. And you'll see there, color coding was pretty much the same. So there was a fatality. There were some serious injuries that were occurring. What stumped us on this one, just looking at the map, is there's a whole lot of straightaways there. You would expect that to happen in curves, but why was it occurring on a straightaway when you didn't have an intersection? So that was something that the team looked at to try to determine what was causing the crashes. And then, what are the actual crash concerns for the RSA that you're doing? This was a data set, and this is one of those charts that gets automatically generated out of GCAT in that CAM tool, that all I had to do was push the button and then the chart generated for me. So in this chart, we saw that there were side swipes, there was left turn issues, head on, but then we had, you see at the very bottom, there were animal issues, and they were kind of interspaced throughout, but more severe in certain sections of the roadway. Well, what we found with this road when we went out is that the areas where the animal crashes were more severe, this road was actually on a very flat section of Ohio that you could just see for miles in either direction, but that segment of the road with the increase in the animal crashes, there was a park there that just, kind of grew up out of the dirt. There was tons of trees. Part of the recommendations were to look at some potential fencing. So, because there were just a ton of deer crashes happening in that area. But this gives you a better feel for what type of crash is happening and at what section of the roadway. And then when you're actually out on the road, you want to make sure that people are aware to look for environmental clues. With the environmental clues, it's not always a data piece that's going to come out of one of those charts. I think the most common environmental clue we find is a tree that's obviously been hit by a vehicle. And, again, I've mentioned it once before, there's so many times that a crash will happen and someone, didn't get injured, came close to it but didn't, or maybe they were just slightly injured and they called someone with a big truck, to come pull them out of the ditch. And you see in the right hand side of the screen, the bottom, that tree obviously had been hit by a vehicle. You can see the marks where the tires went up into the tree and the damage to the tree itself. There's a smaller tree on the right hand side that had almost been taken out, and that's kind of an interesting crash because it was well off the side of the road. But even looking for tire marks in a ditch to see where people are going off the edge of the road, or damaged fences. The RSA we did up in Muskingum County, the over the hill RSA, right at that curve, we knew that there had been many, many more crashes that occurred there because there was actually a farm with a fence, and the owner of that fence was repairing it, 1 to 2 times a week. Now, we didn't have that many crashes reported, but somebody was taking the fence out, and it would be down in the morning when he'd get up. So it's important to look for those environmental clues. Also, at your startup meeting, want to make sure that you talk to your RSA members about documenting what they find while they're out on the RSA. We have a form that we use through our RSAs. We also have some other examples of forms that can be used, and those will all be available on the RSA Toolbox webpage at the link when I send it out to you after the webinar. So, important tip number 2, make sure you have your team packet ready to go before your road safety audit team pre-meeting. And you can use the template that we've got out on the toolbox. You can also borrow a dash cam from Ohio LTAP and go out and film the roadway before the RSA. And we've learned to do this because a lot of times when we go back after we've done the road safety audit, the team members will remember things differently about the road. One might remember a sign being somewhere and the other one doesn't. We find that if we use the dash cam, and I'm going to show you some video footage here in just a couple minutes, that the dash cam helps us all to refresh what it was that we saw when we were out there on the roadway. So you can definitely borrow that from our equipment loan program. So once you have your pre-meeting, you can load up everybody and go out and do your actual field review. The photo you see on the right hand side is of a road safety audit we did in the fall of 2017 out in Xenia Township. And this was actually a township requested road safety audit. And the video footage I have is of a section of this roadway that we looked at. Now, one of the things is you got to make sure that you ensure the safety of your RSA team before you ever head out in the field. It's important to coordinate with law enforcement for temporary traffic control if it's needed. On this one we did because there were some sections of the road where we wanted to get out and look at intersections in a very rural area. So we had members of the Greene County Sheriff's Department that were out there to make certain that our team was going to be safe and do proper temporary traffic control. We make sure that everybody knows they have to wear personal protective equipment. They need to have a hard hat, a vest, proper footwear to be out alongside the road. Here at LTAP, we have a complete set for a team if you would need to borrow it, but a lot of them are doing this on a daily basis or have availability to bring their own equipment with them. And another key is never ever put your team in an area where they can become a distraction to the driving public, because the last thing we want to do when we're out doing a road safety audit is to cause another crash to happen. So when you're out on the road, and this is a photo you'll see there on the right hand side from a different RSA we did actually in the city of Columbus during the summer of 2017, you want to review your roadway by driving it, walking it. You can do both. There's lists of prompts that you can use while you're out on the roadway. So you can use these to kind of trigger questions in your mind as you're looking, and for your team as well, about what they're seeing out there on the roadway. And I'll show you an example here in a minute. But on this RSA that we did here in Columbus, one of the things we did as far as walking it is we were able to determine that the signal timing was off for a crosswalk. A number of us crossed the street a number of times in one section, and none of us could get across in the time that the signal had on it. So that was one of the recommendations, was to go out and retime the signal and the pedestrian crossing. Another thing we found as we were out in this section, there was a nursing home where they had an area where residents would go out to get fresh air, and a lot of times they spend a lot of time out there watching the traffic. Well, some of our RSA team members went over and talked to the residents, and they gave them some insight even on what they were seeing on a daily basis with traffic patterns. So you've got to take advantage of the resources you have while you're out there. You're out doing the field review, there's 4 big categories that we encourage the team to look at. The first one being the geometry of the roadway, obviously your curves, sight distance, things like that. Another is operations. Look to see how the road is actually being used. When the road was set up and the last time it was looked at might be very different from what's going on now. Maybe you've got a business that's open where an old one had closed down and there just wasn't traffic there before, and now there is. Those are important things to look at. You also should look at who's using your roadway and the human factors involved. Do you have a lot of pedestrians, bicyclists? Are there a lot of trucks on that roadway? Do you have a school close by? Children actually look at their environment in a much different perspective than adults do. So if you have kids that are, walking back and forth to school, that's something to factor in the area that you're looking at. And then the actual environment itself. We try to encourage you, when you're doing your road safety audit, to look at the road at the time that you can determine from the data where it's having the most issues, the most crashes. But if you can't, for whatever reason, get out during that time, you can always go out and film it, hopefully at that time. I've gone out at different times of the day or night to catch video footage of a roadway to be able to share with a team when they went out to look at it at a different time of day. But it's good if you can get out at the actual peak time. Prompt list that I mentioned earlier. Here, this one is specific to the G in the GORE, the geometry, and it just takes you through some, considerations. So this is another example we have out on the Road Safety Audit Tech Transfer Toolbox of a packet that was put together for regional RSAs and how to implement them. And this one goes through the different features for geometry, and it goes on, of course, but that's just an example. And there's other prompt lists out there as well. As you start working through your own RSAs, if you come up with a good prompt list, feel free to send it in and we'll add it to the toolbox, because all of us together are going to make this the best process to be used here in Ohio. So important tip number 3, the Regional RSA Implementation Guide is out there on the Road Safety Audit Tech Transfer Toolbox. So use that as a tool when you're putting things together. You can get prompt lists from there and other information. Also make sure that you determine when are the most crashes actually occurring and try to schedule your RSA to happen during that time. One other thing, and this just comes through the experience of having done over 30 different RSAs at different times of the year and areas of the state, is make sure if this is a factor that you put it into the mix. Daylight savings time can be an impact when you're looking at a roadway. Say, your RSA team is getting together in the summertime, but really your data says that your crashes are happening in the winter. Well, you don't want to wait another 6 months and let crashes keep building up till they get to their peak for you to go look at it. You want to go out and try to address the issue when you've determined that it exists. So make sure you factor that in, take into consideration that maybe the lighting is going to be different at the time of day and day of the week, factored on based on the time of year. So that's an important thing to account for. Once your field review is done, I always want my team to go back and debrief right after the field review. The whole team goes back, we put this time into the schedule, and we discuss what we've seen. We look to see what countermeasures can be possible recommendations to be included in the report. Here's the video I was talking to you about, and hopefully it's playing on everyone's screen. I know it's playing on mine. And this is a section of road that we looked at over in Greene County. It actually, in the middle of the section of the road, this is a piece right out of the middle, it was a longer segment. We had an intersection that we just came out of there, and on one side we had Central State University, and the other side we had Wilberforce. So this is a more urban-ish area that we're driving through here. You'll notice as we're going down the road, you can see on the bottom left-hand corner of that video recording the date we recorded it, the time of day we recorded it. It gives us our coordinates as to where we are, how fast we're going. And that's important. We want to make sure we're following the speed limit, driving it as someone who would be following the speed limit would. It's picking up for us all the features and attributes along the roadway, like that pedestrian crossing sign that we just saw there. And then as you're moving farther down the roadway, you're going to see that we're going to move into a more rural setting, and it's going to show more features for the rural area of this roadway. You'll notice that there's a stop ahead sign coming up and some curves. Lower speed, so those curves, weren't deemed as severe and needing to have advance warning. But, here we've got it crossing a section of roadway, and you saw that there was a stop sign there with a placard underneath. That's a question we get a lot. Was there something under a sign? What do we want to put out? Was there one stop sign or two? There's a small little residential area here that we're driving through, and again, you're taking in the features of the roadway and looking to see, how severe are the drop-offs. There was a sign just there to the right, but you didn't really see it till you came up on it because it was covered by the trees. So maybe there's some clearance of brush that needs to go on there. And then as you're moving through the roadway here, we're going to go out of the lower speed area and move more into an actual rural speed area. But just as we're doing that, we're also going to come up against some curves. And these were part of the curves that you saw the photo earlier that we were standing alongside of and watching, because this area apparently has a nickname that we learned while we were out with the team of the Devil's Backbone. Never would have known that from the data that we pulled out of the GCAT system, but that's information you get from the locals, and it's called the Devil's Backbone apparently because the kids love to go drive through this area fast. So it was one of the things our team looked at was how can we encourage people to drive a little slower through this area. What are the different types of countermeasures we can put in place in order to get people to travel this roadway in a safer manner? We had our health department along on this RSA. So the health department was going to work with the colleges there to do education and outreach and promote road safety with the students. A lot of the students for the populations of those two universities were coming from very urban areas into a rural setting and had never really driven rural roads before. So they didn't understand, how important it was to, not take that Devil's Backbone as a challenge and more as a, this is an area you need to slow down for. We just saw a sign on the right-hand side, advanced curve warning sign. It had a recommended advisory speed on it. There's an arrow, but it's way back in the distance. So these are all things we were able to view, not only when we were out on the road doing the road safety audit, but once we got back to the debrief meeting. So with that, we also had provided all of our participants a list of the proven safety countermeasures. And, countermeasures that we specifically looked at from that video that you just saw. We looked at the roadway departure countermeasures, enhanced delineation and friction for horizontal curves to see if that would be an option. We discussed rumble strips. We talked about the safety edge. We talked about, roadside design improvements at curves. We also talked about, maybe long-term, that one intersection, down the road that's between the two universities, if they had a continued number of issues there, maybe that would end up being recommended for a roundabout, but it's a much higher dollar fix, and I'll discuss kind of the priorities that we look at working through when we put together a list of recommendations. Number 11 on the list, the systemic application of multiple low-cost countermeasures at stop-controlled intersections. This is basically going through and re-signing the whole corridor. And that's a low-cost safety countermeasure that you can recommend, and most times it'll be something that'll end up getting funded, which is great. They looked at the pedestrian hybrid beacons for the campus area. And of course, I want to point out, under the cross-cutting section is a road safety audit. This itself is a safety countermeasure. So it's important, to have all that information for your team. While you're doing that meeting, you need somebody who's a volunteer from the team to document your discussion. And then you need to go through and rank your recommendations for improvement based on a time frame, really. You want to look short, medium, long-term implementation, and you want to consider your lower cost countermeasures, where you can put those in, because it helps to stretch your funding. So normally in the short term, we look at what is the low cost countermeasures that we can get implemented quickly in order to start driving those crash numbers down. And then we categorize the other ideas that have been proposed, the medium and the long-term implementation. Long-term implementation are your more expensive fixes, like the roundabouts or anything where you're going to have to do a property take and there's a longer time period and more money involved. But it's amazing what you can get done with those shorter-term, low-cost safety countermeasures. And, we're going to talk about the implementation piece in a little bit with the funding, but I can tell you that those low-cost safety countermeasures are definitely something that are highly favored when you get to the implementation piece. So important tip number 4, just to kind of break things up a little bit, there are recommendation report templates out on the toolbox. You do not have to reinvent the wheel. There's also things you can ask for in your recommendation report that are going to get 100% funding from HSIP funds. So if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, you're going to see pavement markings, traffic signs. Those items are listed there. So definitely take that list into consideration and share it with your team, because they can help you to make the determination of what they want to do short, medium, and long term on the recommendations. Now we're up to steps 6 and 7. And as I mentioned earlier in the webinar, these steps really, you're looking at way we do our process of merging them, because our roadway owner is a part of our RSA team. If you choose to do it with the roadway owner not being a part of the RSA team, then you're going to have to go back to the roadway owner and present your findings and let them prepare a formal response. The way I look at it is, here in Ohio, our roadway ownership, because of home rule, they own the road. I'm not going to go out and do an RSA on someone's road unless, I've had discussion and they're included and invited. So that's a big, reason why we have them as a part of that, roadway safety audit team from the very beginning. So the other considerations for your findings, incorporating the findings, and this is step 8, the funding piece. You really need to start with your district safety coordinators. And this is a list of the current district safety coordinators, but I'll make sure you have a link to where this list is kept, because it does change on occasion. People get promotions or maybe, they get a chance to retire. So we do have a fabulous team, though, of district safety coordinators that can help you with the funding question. Another thing that I'll recommend is make sure, because there's going to be a lot of enthusiasm when you're sitting down to do the short, medium, and long term, make sure that they understand that they need to have capacity to do the improvements. I had a township one time that when we delivered all the signs to be installed, they said it felt like Christmas till I realized how much work I had sitting here. So, the time schedule needs to be based on the capacity of the agency that's taking on the work to put that countermeasure in place. And if they need additional help to get the countermeasure put in place, that's where you can, also have that discussion with the district safety coordinators. Ownership of the thing that's going to be implemented. Not everything is an engineering fix. It could be that you're looking at wanting law enforcement to partner and stepping up their enforcement efforts with speeding or stop sign running. It could be that it's a situation where you have the health department involved. They're going to do outreach efforts, so it's many members of the team and their agencies who are committing to helping with these efforts. Main funding is the Highway Safety Improvement Program, and they have a process set up, and you work through the folks that were on the previous slide to get applications submitted. They do applications twice a year, April and September, and this formal process works very well for the large projects. I will tell you that they have also put into place a more streamlined funding program for countermeasures which are less complex to implement, really only dealing with one engineering discipline. They need to be $500,000 or less in cost. And again, you can talk to these same district safety coordinators about that streamlined process. So if you have something that, is lower dollar and your team wants to move on it right away, you can talk to them about going into that other process, because it's year-round. You don't have to wait for these two funding deadlines, application deadlines to come up. Another thing that our safety section has done is they've created a list of different ways that they are ready and prepared to help the local public agencies here in Ohio with improving roadway safety. They have regional and county safety plans that they will help you put together, and they have teams already, under contract, ready to help with this. They also have their systemic safety improvements. So instead of just looking at a spot or a corridor, if you want to look across your whole system, their team will actually help you do that, do the data crunching for you, and then help you with applying for the funding. So that's another way that you can look at improving safety on your roadways. Safety studies are available under this new program, and that's where they'll go in and analyze the roadway and the traffic data. And traditionally, if you have those larger projects that have to go into the April or September funding application cycle, you need a safety study to accompany that application traditionally. And you can talk to the folks in this program about getting help with getting that completed. Last but not least, if I've scared you off in the last 45 minutes, and I hope I haven't, or maybe you just even want some help getting started with RSAs in your jurisdiction, they do have assistance with road safety audits, and they can help you through this actual process. But, I would encourage you not to be scared off by it. I'm not an engineer by trade, and sometimes, that can be a good thing. I know a lot of you that are on this webinar probably are engineers, and I applaud you for it. You guys have worked really hard for your education, your licenses, but those of us who are non-engineers can bring some perspective too, and hopefully you see value in that. And I've been leading RSA teams because it's a process we're working through. Now, my engineers who are on the team, are the ones who are really helping to drive forward the technical part of it, and that's important. But if you need help, the road safety audit assistance is there for you too. And this presentation, which will be sent out to everybody who was on the webinar today, has a link where you can apply for this assistance, and I'll make sure that you get that The services are being offered, these 4 things that I've talked about are offered for free to local public agencies and regional planning organizations. So, I definitely encourage you to take a look at what it is that you could get assistance with and, move forward on it, because we want to keep driving down the crashes that are happening in Ohio, and we want to keep driving down the fatalities on our roadway systems. The only acceptable goal is 0, because I know none of us would want anyone to lose someone from their family. And I encourage you, don't file this away when the webinar's done and say, I'll get to it. Make this a top priority and start the process and get it rolling. So again, we've gone over all 8 steps in the road safety audit process. There are a lot of national resources available out there. If you want to, do a Google search, we've got some links here and in our tech transfer toolbox where we've pre-screened information for you to help you with that search. One thing that I'll note on this slide is we also have some prompts lists that were created by the Ped Bike Center. When you're doing RSAs for pedestrians or bicyclists, and then we've got prompts when you're looking at wrong way driving issues, if you're going to go out as an RSA team to look at that. So one big thing before we started RSAs here in Ohio that was a question that many locals had was, am I setting myself up for problems down the road by having a team come in and give me a list of recommendations of what I need to fix on my road? They said, I don't want some attorney to be able to come in here and ask for that document and then use it against me. So I want to finish out the presentation by assuring you that that will not be the case. There's actually a federal law that says that what is created under the road safety audit process can't be subject to discovery or admitted into evidence in a federal or state court proceeding. And I've highlighted that here on the screen for you. Our federal partners understand the importance of being proactive, and they work to put in safeguards in place to make you comfortable with using this road safety audit process. So I would definitely encourage you to ask whatever questions you have now. I haven't seen a lot come in through the chat pod while I was talking, so I'm happy to unmute everybody who's on the call, and I'll go through and unmute you one by one. But please feel free to ask additional questions in the chat pod or ask them on the phone line. I'd be more than happy to take any questions you have at this time. I'm just working through unmuting people. I'll let everybody know when I get to the end. I'm definitely starting to hear some people talk there. So that's why we normally keep people muted during the presentation. Yep. Somebody's clicking a whole lot. Maybe I'll just keep it to, I'm sorry. I'm going to go ahead and remute everybody. Okay, I've got everybody unmuted now, but there's an awful lot of clicking going on, so I'm going to go ahead and remute everybody because that's annoying for all of us. I apologize. It doesn't look like we'll be able to have our audio question and answer time this time, but is there a link available to the RSA prompt list? Yes, there is, and I will send it out to everybody after the presentation is completed. I'm also attempting to record this webinar, so if I'm successful, I will send you out a link to the presentation itself as well. If you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat pod on the bottom left-hand side, or you can also email me directly with your questions. Hopefully you found the webinar useful this morning, and again, don't just tuck this information away. You want to act on it and make sure you start moving things forward, because that's the only way we're going to keep driving that number down to 0. And if you think about it, there's a huge national number for fatalities that occur, but if you look at it jurisdiction by jurisdiction, the number gets much smaller. So if we each focus on our own jurisdictions and start driving those numbers down, then that big national number is going to come down as well. So, any other questions in the chat pod? No? If not, thank you so much for your time today. We sincerely appreciate it, and we hope to see you back on another LTAP webinar soon. Thank you.